What we're going to work on is transformations of square root functions. And I want you to notice that, for example 1, we have a square root that is stretched by a factor of 3. For example B, or example B is stretched by a factor of 1/2. And C is reflected and stretched by a factor of 2. So C is kind of obvious. The one that's reflected is the green one, so it's going to be y equals -2 square root of x. And the one that is compressed vertically by a factor of 1/2 is y equals 1/2 square root of x. And the one that is compressed, stretched vertically, and you can tell it's stretched vertically, it's kind of going up, is y equals 3 square root of x. So basically, the number that's in front of the square root is going to affect whether it stretches or it compresses, okay? If we look at example 2, you notice that we have the parent function. Here is the parent function. And we know that the +1 is going to move the function up, and we notice that the -2 is going to move the function down. So if we wanted to know which is which, if we look at A, it says shifted down 2 units. So obviously that's going to be y equals the square root of x minus 2. B is shifted up 1 unit. So B is going to be the red one. So we have y is equal to the square root of x plus 1. So that number that's after the radical, that's outside the radical, is affecting whether the function moves up or moves down. The next example, we notice that it's either going to go left or it's going to go right. So shifted left. So we have shifted left, and the other one is shifted right. And remember, we've talked about this in the past. We would think that the one that's going to the right would be positive, but it's actually negative. So we have y equals the square root of x minus 1. And you notice that -1 is inside the radical. Okay, and then the blue one is the one that is shifted to the left. So you have y equals the square root of x plus 4. So the previous one, we had plus and minus outside the radical that moved it up or down. This one here, we have +4 and -1, which are inside the radical. It's moving it either left or it's moving right. So now we're going to go ahead and go to the last example. And we have a horizontal stretch or compression. Now you notice that there is one that's reflected over the y-axis. And I want you to notice that the green one, it says compressed horizontally by a factor of 3 and reflected over the y-axis. So we have y equals, and we have the radical, and then we have a negative. When you have a negative there, that means it's going to be reflected over the y-axis. And if you want to know what's going to happen, compressed, so that 3 is going to compress it horizontally. Now, if it's going to be stretched, we're going to have y equals the square root of 1/3 x. So that 1/3 is going to stretch horizontally. And then the last one, which is the blue one, is going to compress it horizontally. So the number inside the radical will either compress the function or the graph, or stretch. In this case, it's going to stretch it here. Now, if there is a negative inside, it's going to reflect over the y-axis. It's going to reflect over the y-axis.